Thank you. Thanks. Settle down, class. There will, as usual, be an exam later on, so pay attention, don't want to hear any snoring. Thank you so much, Free Library. I should say thank you to PBS as well for allowing us to make a wonderful co-production with the BBC. It's always really wonderful to come back to Philadelphia. It reminds me that actually, I think this is right. Goodness, historians ought to get their dates right. But in 1790, it must be the case that Washington was still living in Philadelphia. American historians, is that right? Yeah. Yes? Yes. And when he goes on tour with Thomas Jefferson to promote the Bill of Rights to the constitutional amendments, as well as becoming more acquainted with the country, as he charmingly put it, the two famously founding fathers not getting on terribly well. And they visit Newport, Rhode Island, as you know. How's it, you getting the, this sounds to me like, you know, I sound to myself like a kind of cross between a very stuffy professor and Keith Richards, actually, so I could do it in his voice, if you like, you know, as well. And they go to Newport, Rhode Island in the blazing August of 1790. And famously, they have a wonderful visit, and a great letter has been written to them by Moses Seixas, the leader of the Touro synagogue, the Sephardi synagogue there, which is really a beautiful place if you've never been there, Jewish or not Jewish. And it has inside the Aron HaKodesh, inside the Ark, this extraordinary Sefer Torah made of deerskin, which sounds very American, but actually seems to have been brought. And there's this extraordinary, beautiful Rubicon, tawny color said to have been brought, and probably was, from by a Marrano family from some unidentified place in Jewish Spain after the expulsion in 1492. So Washington goes, and Seixas has written this charming letter in which he, it's a sort of hymn to, he really wants absolutely equal rights for the Jews, and they de facto, but not de jure yet, have equal rights, but they, of course, Jews can vote. And Seixas presents this kind of rhetorical nosegay to Washington, that we live in an empire of laws and so on. And it's very, very touching. And the famous phrase, to persecution, I always get this wrong, to persecution no sanction, to bigotry no assistance, or it might be the other way around. And it's, we have now a country where every man can live beneath his vine and fig and so on. It's from quote from the Bible. And Washington writes back, it's a wonderful use of political recycling, deeply American even from the beginning, where Washington says, it's a wonderful truth that now, you know, we live in a country to which persecution gets no sanction and bigotry no assistance, as if he's just made it up. You know, actually, it's the first presidential, but not the last, plagiarism there. But it's an adorable love-in. And Jefferson ditto, but Jefferson probably more than George Washington at that point would have been aware of a remarkable tradition, which is sort of kind of behind, in a way, much of what I wanted to do with the series and the 2 volumes, the second of which is being written as we speak. In fact, I think I'm going to go and finish a chapter. No, not really. And called The Hebrew Republic, and some of you may know about this, and it was, literally, the Respublica Hebreorum was first written about in Italy in the second half of the 16th century by Catholic Italian Christian, obviously Catholic Christian critics of the sort of fierce counter-Reformation papal line coming down from Rome. So this was very popular in cities like the Hebrew Republic idea, very popular in cities like Bologna and, of course, in Venice. There's a wonderful man called Ulisse Aldrovandi, who I've not written a lot about and who's not in the series, who believed charmingly, he was the first Gentile, I think, to echo some of the more implausible bits of bragging which Jewish writers like Philo of Alexandria, for example, are committed in late antiquity, which assume that all of Greek culture, including Plato, Aristotle, and the whole sense in which the Greeks gave the world a set of ethical norms to live by, could only have been accomplished if they'd read the Torah and the Jewish Bible, and essentially the Greeks, it's a wonderful refutation of the notion that Greeks and Jews were oil and water and were never compatible. So Aldoravandi indeed thought that pretty much everything worthwhile in civilization owed to a Jewish origin, and others followed. And what they loved about the Hebrew Republic, by which they meant, they thought of Moses as they said, a civil magistrate, it's charming, or a lawgiver. And what they noticed about the initial governance, as they thought of it, of the tribes of Israel wandering in the desert, was that there was no king. Of course, there were Jewish kings would come along, but for these champions of the idea that a Hebrew Republic was given to the world by two figures, a civil magistrate and a chief authority, namely God himself. When you got a king, Saul, David, Solomon, you were already in deep moral trouble. David, magnificent as he was, famous for certain kind of peccadillos, Solomon, the temple, but in other ways the beginning of the end, and so on. So they were interested in thinking about really this primordial constitution of, they thought of, they described the Sanhedrin in very wishful thinking terms as a kind of senate. There's a lovely book by the Harvard political theorist Eric Nelson called The Hebrew Republic, for those learned, many learned among you who want to follow this up. So the tradition by which there was some sort of civil governance, which began at Mount Sinai and then provided a non-royal model but non-papal model for the rest of the world, has an extraordinary kind of life. Some of its early writings go out of Italy, they go to the Netherlands, they're quickly translated into English in particular, and also into French. They influence Oliver Cromwell, they influence Oliver Cromwell's secretary, John Milton. They therefore are transmitted to John Locke, and Locke and James Harrington, you'll know, are the hardcore theorists of morally righteous republicanism, in which Thomas Jefferson, that is, who was an assiduous borrower of books from the Williamsburg Library. There was a great library, as well as Franklin's Library, in Williamsburg, Virginia, as I'm sure you know. Jefferson undoubtedly noted. And it's an instance, really, of, as I say, something I've tried to do. The point of this whole project was really to offer a view which was not just, I hope, sentimental cultural pluralism on my part, but I am a sentimental cultural pluralist, so sue me. But actually empirically, historically true. That's to say, Jews have never lived a separate life, even very Orthodox Jews, unless they've been forced to, from the cultures in which they've embedded by the likes of the Nazis. Even the Venice ghetto, of course, was locked at night, but it was an entirely porous place. People came and went during the day. Artisans came into work in the textile shops and the metallurgical shops in the ghetto, and Jews went out of the ghetto. What a surprise. As doctors, you all know, you know the joke about President Goldblatt, don't you? Come on. Oh, you're in trouble now. Okay, so we've got an African-American president, we're going to get a woman president, for sure. So it's time for President Goldblatt. So he phones up and says, "Mom, you're coming to the inauguration." She goes, "That's a long way. I've got nothing to wear." He says, "Mom, it's Jewish president." "You're kidding." He said, "Neiman Saks, Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, whatever's open to you. Air Force One will be sent." She said, "All right." So she goes, she's sitting there in front of the Capitol steps, and President Goldblatt's taking the inaugural oath, just on the Chumash, on the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, and she makes with the, oh God, I know, you think really the Israeli Defense Forces would conquer wherever they went if they used the Jewish elbow, it's the Jewish finger and the Jewish elbow. So she does the Jewish elbow, and she says, see that man? And the neighbor goes, yes. She said, "His brother is a doctor." So, okay, digression. Why? Surely not. Those of you who really lead a kind of pitifully enclosed life and have nothing left to do could check it out. Simon Schama Tells Jewish Jokes on YouTube. And this was something I was